I want to welcome each of you to the WMU Cooley Community Conversation virtual event, obviously, for Martin Luther King Day. Appreciate you all coming. If you have comments or questions, please enter them into the chat function, in the participant chat function during our Q&A session. So the next order of events is I would like to introduce our president and dean, James McGrath, who will introduce our keynote speaker. President Dean McGrath, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jackie. And thank you to everyone for joining us for our Martin Luther King Day Community Conversation virtual event. And we're going to discuss how we can continue to honor the life of Martin Luther King Jr. and pay homage to his dream today as attorneys and as a society. It is my pleasure to introduce our special guest and speaker today, attorney Robyn McCoy. Robyn is an attorney. She's been a part-time lecturer at Eastern Michigan University, where she taught a class about law and the African-American experience. She was also a legislative assistant for the Honorable State Representative Ronnie Peterson of the 54th District, which is now the 32nd District. She graduated with honors from the University of Chicago in 1996, and she received her law degree from the University of Michigan Law School in 2000. While she was attending the University of Michigan Law School, Ms. McCoy was the Political Action Chair for the Native American and Black Law Students Alliance, handling community, civic, and political meetings, debates, and protests in support of affirmative action. She also tutored elementary school students at the Pattengill Elementary School and participated in an externship in South Africa in 1999, where she worked with Willie Hofmeyr, head of the Asset Forfeiture Unit and former anti-apartheid activist. By the way, she was also mentored by First Lady Michelle Obama during her senior year in college. She is the president of the Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan, past president of the Vanzetti Hamilton Bar Association, and vice chair of the Michigan Democratic Women's Caucus. Robyn has worked as a deputy defender in the Legal Aid Defenders Association in Detroit, and as a guardian ad litem, as a lawyer guardian ad litem, defense attorney and educational advocate at the Michigan Children's Law Center in Detroit, Michigan. She's a partner with McCoy Associates, PLLC, located in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where she specializes in criminal defense, family law, educational advocacy, estate planning, probate, wrongful death, and personal injury. And she's received numerous awards for her commitment to social justice. She's traveled all over the state, planning, facilitating, and organizing programs on various topics such as what to do when stopped by the police, expungements, how to set aside your criminal convictions, pathways to law school, love that one, and how to navigate the public school system. You can find Attorney McCoy on various social media outlets. She has a YouTube channel, Robyn Legal. She can also be followed on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm going to get those addresses up in the chat shortly. But now, please join me in welcoming our guest speaker, Robyn McCoy.
Thank you, President or Dean McGrath. I met you at, it was a diversity and inclusion event this fall. I think we were in Troy. So, and I was really pleased with your comments, what you had to say about Cooley Law School. I have another number of friends that are lawyers and judges that went to Cooley Law School. You know, and I see some friends here. I see Monica Knuckles, who she and I attended U of M Law School together. Attorney or Professor Vestrin and Professor Moore. So I'm definitely excited. I definitely want to thank Ms. Freeman for inviting me to come out and speak with you as well. So as Dean McGrath said, the theme is Martin Luther King's vision and justice in action, and what we can do as community members, law students, and members of the legal profession to advance social justice in our communities. And so first, I want to provide some background information about Martin Luther King. You know, his birthday was just on Sunday. So he was born January 15th, 1929. If he had lived, he'd be 94. He was assassinated and died April 4th, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee. He was a Baptist minister and social activist who led the civil rights movement in the United States from the mid-1950s until his death by assassination in 68. His leadership was fundamental to that movement's success in ending the legal segregation of African Americans in the South and other parts of the United States. Dr. King rose to national prominence as head of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which promoted nonviolent tactics such as the massive March on Washington in 1963 to achieve civil rights. He also was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. And some of you may have done this already, but I'm just going to put it out there. I'm a museum junkie. My background's anthropology, so I don't blame it on my mom because she took us to museums all the time, and I guess it just stuck with us. And so I actually, a few years ago, my sister and I drove out to the King Center. You can go to the King Center in Atlanta. And we initially had intended to go there for a day, and a day turned into 3 days. And you can see where Dr. King was born, raised, where he went to school, where he went to church. You can see they have his gravesite. You see a lot about his wife, Dr. Coretta Scott King, and you see just about his foundation. They had a room that was dedicated to, I don't know if they still have it, but when I was there, they had a room dedicated to Dr. King and Gandhi, and they were showing how Gandhi had influence on him as far as the nonviolence movement. And coincidentally, I'm a big fan of, follower of Gandhi's too. So I've been to India and I've been to Gandhi's gravesite and where he spent, the place where he spent his last days before he was killed. I just think it's very important, like, to read about these issues, watch videos, go to museums. There's one of my favorite museums that's here in Michigan is the African American, the Charles H. Wright Museum. You can go and find out more about the Black experience, and you can find out about the civil rights movement. My partner and I went to the Lorraine Motel, so you can go there in Memphis, Tennessee. They have a civil rights museum there. You can learn more about the civil rights movement. They had a legal conference it was in Montgomery, Alabama. They brought in Brian Stevenson with the Equal Justice Initiative. He wrote the book Just Mercy. There's also a movie. He is, to me, he's definitely a personification of carrying on King's legacy today. And you can go there, you can see the Legacy Museum, you can see they have a lynching memorial, and it's very powerful. And I'm there, and I'm just looking at the markers, and then I called my mom and I said, I thought we had a relative that was lynched, and then lo and behold, she tells me the name, and I found the marker for my great uncle that was lynched, and that was just very powerful. I made a video about it. So I definitely think it's important that we go to these museums. There's the African American Museum in DC. There's the Civil Rights Museum. There are museums all over the nation. So it's very important not just to, read about this stuff, watch videos, but also to go. I'm a visual learner, so go and see these places and activities to ensure that a brighter future for ourselves and our children. So now I want to turn specifically to Dr. King's vision. I have taught a class in the past, Law and the African American Experience, and what I typically do with the class is we examined some of Dr. King's speeches. We look at the I Have a Dream speech, we look at I Have Been to the Mountaintop, and we look at Letter from a Birmingham Jail. And so specifically, I'm going to start with talking about the letter. So, and I want to give you some context. So it's April 12, 1963, Dr. King and nearly 50 protesters and civil rights leaders were arrested for leading a Good Friday demonstration as a part of the Birmingham campaign. This is designed to bring national attention to the brutal racist treatment suffered by Blacks in one of the most segregated cities in America, in Birmingham, Alabama. For months, an organized boycott of the city's white-owned businesses had failed to achieve any substantive results, leaving King and others convinced that they had no other option but direct actions, ignoring a recently passed ordinance that prohibited public gathering without an official permit. For King, this arrest, it was his 13th arrest, and it would become one of the most important of his career. Thrown into solitary confinement, King was initially denied access to his lawyers or allowed to contact his wife until President John F. Kennedy was urged to intervene on his behalf. As previously agreed upon, King was not immediately bailed out of jail by his supporters, having instead agreed to a longer stay in jail to draw attention to the plight of Black Americans. So when we look at that, I'm just like, just imagine somebody that's been in jail. At this point, he's been in jail 13 times. He was very passionate about the movement. For me, as a criminal defense attorney, I've been into the jail. I don't know if any of you guys have visited anybody in jail or been to jail. It's nasty, it's disgusting, but you have somebody that is driven and has a vision and is going to see it through. And I think just like Gandhi went on hunger strikes. He was beaten and dealt with all kinds of things. And so you have Dr. King, just a crusader for the cause. So shortly after King's arrest, a friend smuggled in a copy of an April 12 Birmingham newspaper, which included an open letter written by 8 local Christian and Jewish religious leaders, which criticized both the demonstrations and King himself, whom they considered an outside agitator. Isolated in his cell, King began working on a response. Without notes or research materials, King drafted an impassioned defense of his use of nonviolent but direct action. Dr. King was the most famous civil rights activist of the 1960s. He called for nonviolent means, including sit-ins, boycotts, and marches to end segregation in the South. In the early 1960s, Birmingham, Alabama was one of the most segregated cities in the U.S. He traveled there in '63 to fight against racial discrimination. And, as I indicated, he was arrested. They wrote him this letter. And so that's the context for the letter. So this letter was written on April 16th, 1963. And he's explaining in the letter that he has organizational ties. That's what brought him there. He also talks about he was there because it was an injustice. He said, "I'm compelled to carry the gospel of freedom from my own hometown, like Paul from the Bible. I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for help." So Dr. King here has a vision for liberation of Black people from the apartheid system in America. He's taking action by going to a place where injustice exists. He and others protested, and they went to jail to shed light on the cause. He had a vision to end racism, poverty, militarism. I know some of you probably have heard of Dr. William Barber, who's with the Poor People's Campaign, and I've used some of his materials in my class as well. I look at him, just like Brian Stevenson, as a modern day crusader for liberation for people who are oppressed. And I look at him as somebody that's carrying on Dr. King's torch. So, we still have racism that exists. I mean, I've worked as an educational advocate. I've seen it in the field of education. I've been in the schools in Detroit, and there are some schools that are really good, some schools not so good, not the best resources and materials. Even though we said we got rid of segregation, there's still problems going on with the education system. There's discrimination in housing. I recently ran for state rep. So I have a part later on where I'm encouraging people to run for office. I ran for office. I didn't make it past the primary, but I tried. So that's all you can do. But as I was out on the campaign trail, talking to the people, to the everyday people, this housing issue, it's a big issue. In my hometown here in Ypsilanti, you have people that are moving out of this city because the rent is too high. And it's unacceptable. Everybody should be able to have affordable housing. Everybody should have food, clothing, and shelter. We're one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And, some of you probably have seen it. When I go in Detroit, when I go even Ann Arbor, I've seen homeless people. I was in California for my cousin's wedding. We were on the beach. There were homeless people. It shouldn't be this way. Everybody should have food, clothing, and shelter. And so also one of the issues that I see in my work as a criminal defense attorney, I see issues of poverty. I mean, that's unfortunate. People should not be locked up because they're poor. People that have mental health issues. I've had to help some clients that are languishing they shouldn't be in the jail in the first place. They should be in a mental health facility, but they're languishing there. They have situations where if they have no place to go, then they're left there. And I've had to work with the family or try to work with resources in the community to get them out. I have a client now that's lingering there. He was deemed incompetent, and we're trying to work to get him placed somewhere, because the jail is not the place for him. It's the same with issues with substance abuse issues. I see clients that have drug issues, and they shouldn't be in the jail. They're not getting the treatment that they need. It makes me think about what Michelle Alexander talks about in the new Jim Crow. How we had, when I teach this in my class, we talk about the history of the African-American experience starting from 1619. We look at the Nicole Hannah-Jones article in the New York Times. I know she has a book now. I have the book, haven't read it yet, but I'm excited about it. You talk about slavery, you talk about the Civil War, Emancipation Proclamation, the passage of the 13th Amendment. Then you have the Black Codes, then you have Jim Crow. Then in her book, she talks about how the new Jim Crow is a prison industrial complex. Angela Davis talks about this too. She has a book, Are Prisons Obsolete? And she talks about the prison industrial complex. And, I've been, I think it's just upsetting that people, like when I first went to Detroit and I saw people locked up in the cage, it made me think about slavery. Like if you go to the Charles H. Wright Museum, they have a slave boat and a ship, and they have people crammed in there, and then you go visit people in the jail cell, you have people crammed in the jail cell, and it's upsetting. Obviously I'm not saying that people, if you do wrong, you shouldn't have consequences, because I had a Black mama, old school. So if we did wrong, there were some consequences there. So I'm not saying you shouldn't have consequences, but just, we should be more humane in the way that we treat people. For myself, I heard the call to advance justice at the age of 14. My parents raised me to be Afrocentric and socially conscious. My father is a lawyer. He does personal injury, wrongful death. So he did criminal for a minute, and then they gave him an axe murder case, and that was it. So he calls me like, you're like a social worker, but so then my mom is a nurse. She worked at the VA hospital, and so they wanted to make sure that I was firmly rooted in my Afrocentricity and my Blackness. I was attending a predominantly white Catholic school, but they were like, we want to make sure you're Black. So they had us we took classes on Afrocentricity, on Blackness. We did African dance. We participated in plays. The People Could Fly, Our Time of Day. And so I initially kind of had an interest in acting. I thought about acting, and some of you may be too young to remember the original Dynasty, and there's Joan Collins and Diane Carroll, and I'm like, I know, I love both of them. I know I'm supposed to be represented for Diane Carroll, but I love both Joan Collins and Diane Carroll. So I was just like, I want to be an actress. It's so glamorous. And then I became, I was ingratiated in the issue of the prison industrial complex. And I decided, okay, I'm going to use my intelligence and skill set to act, if you will, in the courtroom to help liberate the brothers and sisters in the system. And that's what I've been doing. I've been doing it 21 years. And so it started with criminal defense. It evolved into somebody had advised me to start representing children. So I represented children. I still represent children in my private practice. And then from there, it led to educational advocacy, helping students with special needs, to get, their special ed support, helping to prevent the school to prison pipeline. So as I said, I was 14. At 16, I was a congressional page, and I went to DC to learn the inner workings of Congress. And then I went on to University of Chicago. My friends and I, Marcia and Joan, they didn't have a lot of African Americans, even though they're surrounded by African American community. The percentage when I was there, I think it was like 5% Black. And so we as Black women felt isolated on campus. And so there weren't like a lot of Black fraternities or sororities. Like my partner, he's a Omega, so I'm learning more about it that way. But so we started an academic support network for Black women called Sister Friends. And we would have events, we would bring in speakers, we would have teas. We brought in Gwendolyn Brooks. So we definitely worked to uplift ourselves so we could support ourselves in this process of getting through college. And I also, while I was there at the University of Chicago, I met up with Michelle Obama. She was an associate dean, and she helped me with my law school application. And today is her birthday, so happy birthday, Michelle. And she was just very, Michelle, I met up with Barack as well, President Obama. They were just regular people. He was teaching a class on racism at the law school. I sat in the class. Michelle urged me to take it, but I was graduating early. I had, after later on, I was kicking myself, like, why didn't I find a way to take that class? And I have friends that played basketball with Barack. I mean, they were just, when they were there, they're rock stars now, and kind of unobtainable, but they were just everyday people. And, Michelle was just very encouraging with the whole law school process. I remember I had talked to her again during my second year in law school, and I was talking about, well, what should I do? Because there was interviewing on campus. It started like the next semester, and you can interview locally or out of the state. And I was like, Michelle, I sent her an email and I said, well, what do you think I should do? And she said, you should go where you have the most support. And for me, the most support was here in Michigan. And then I was able to meet up with her again in 2012. I wasn't sure if she recognized me. She recognized me. She gave me a hug, and it was surreal. And so part of that experience has influenced me to mentor. I mentor aspiring lawyers. I mentor law students. I mentor other lawyers. I've been mentored along the way. So I think it's important that you pay it forward. It's just very important. So as I was talking about my practice, so I do criminal defense. I've represented children. My mentor, Judge Deborah Thomas, recruited me, as she does with other attorneys, to do workshops on expungement. And it's interesting because we're traveling all over the state. We're educating people about clearing their records. And then the clean slate legislation comes to pass in April of 2021. And it was a really beautiful thing, because before, the laws were not as expansive, and so we can only help so many people. And then it's become more expansive. There's still room to grow, but I have a practice that's dedicated to helping people clear their records. And I can't tell you, like, when we're in court and we clear a person's record, I feel liberated. I didn't even do anything wrong. But it's just so liberating when you do that. So I definitely, for people that are looking for activities to do, I mean, it's a matter of, you have to do the administrative work of completing the paperwork. You have to have a lawyer involved, obviously. But it's definitely, to me, it's like an instant reward, and you're helping people to get a second chance. And I think that's what it's all about, is helping people. And so anybody that's watching or listening to this, I would say, if you feel compelled in some way to be involved with social justice movements, then just do what your heart compels you to do and go from there. So Dr. King, back to the letter, he says, I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So there were many people who felt this way when George Floyd was killed by the police. There was a great awakening across the nation and the world. There were protests and demonstrations everywhere. This resulted in Mr. Floyd's persecutors being locked up, charged, and convicted. His family was compensated. However, there's still work that needs to be done. There needs to be the passage of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. I actually made a video about it, a little video. It's on my Robyn Legal website. But this act, it's a bill that addresses a wide range of policies and issues regarding policing practices and law enforcement accountability. It increases accountability for law enforcement misconduct, restricts the use of certain policing practices, enhances transparency and data collection, and establishes best practices and training requirements. This bill enhances existing enforcement mechanisms to remedy violations by law enforcement. And among other things, it does the following. It lowers the criminal intent standard from willful to knowing or reckless to convict a law enforcement officer for misconduct in a federal prosecution. It limits qualified immunity as a defense to liability in a private civil action against law enforcement officers. and grants administrative subpoena power to the Department of Justice in pattern or practice investigations. It establishes a framework to prevent and remedy racial profiling by law enforcement at the federal, state, and local levels. It also limits the unnecessary use of force and restricts the use of no-knock warrants, chokeholds, and cartoid holds. It creates a national registry, the National Police Misconduct Registry, to compile data on complaints and records of police misconduct. It also establishes new reporting requirements, including on the use of force, officer misconduct, and routine police practicing, stops and searches. Finally, it directs the DOJ to create uniform accreditation standards for law enforcement agencies and requires law enforcement officers to complete training on racial profiling, implicit bias, and duty to intervene when another officer uses excessive force. So the bill basically, it passed the House, and then the Republicans held it up in the Senate in 2021. So some of you probably know this already, but it's still, people are still dying. Black and brown people are still being brutalized by the police, and you know, we need to do something about it. I would encourage people to reach out to your local congressperson or senator, or run for office. As I said, I was going to say, you know, those of you feel inclined, run for office to make a difference. So back in his letter, he says, the letter from the Birmingham jail, Dr. King says, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with a narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the U.S. can never be considered an outsider within its bounds." So on this issue, it actually kind of makes me think of, I mean, there's a lot of issues, but one of the things that kind of comes pressing is this issue of environmental racism. You know, we have here in Michigan, we've had the water was contaminated in Flint, Benton Harbor. Even I know Mississippi, we Black women lawyers, I'm the president of Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan. We sent a donation to the folks in Mississippi because they've had water contaminated there. And some people might say, oh, well, who cares about other folks? You know, that's not in my neighborhood. Okay, but if people get sick, they have to go to the hospital. There's you know, there's lawsuits that are filed against the state, the local government. One way or another, everybody is affected. And you know, I look at, you have these corporations are polluting water or the air. It affects all of us. Climate change is real. If you look at the news, I have to watch it in moderation, because you watch the news, it's like I'm like, I have a friend in California. I'm like, how can you live in California? It just seems like they have something going on down south. I'm like, is there anywhere that you can be where climate change isn't real? No, there isn't. It's you know, like Dr. King said, what affects one directly affects all of us indirectly. So I think it's incumbent that we do something about this. We're basically on the same ship and in America, and if this ship goes down, we're all going down. So it's incumbent on us to right the ship and make sure that we steady the course, and you know, we deal with we help to heal the planet in racism, classism, and sexism. We must ensure that there's equality, fairness, and justice for all, regardless of their race, gender, class, or sexual orientation. You may ask yourself, how am I to solve some of these pressing issues? What I do, I would suggest you know, what I do is I go to a quiet place, I meditate or pray and see what comes to mind. Ask, what am I called to do? I believe that we're all put here for a purpose, and that we can each play a part in solving the problems of the world. On this issue of what affects one directly affects all of us indirectly, it also brings to mind, you know, going back to this police brutality issue. You know, so I remember I was actually working at the Michigan Children's Law Center at the time, and I just kept hearing, well, even before the issue with the police, I heard about Trayvon Martin, and I was very emotional and distraught about it. You know, I would often counsel my clients, mostly African-American males, that if you do everything you're supposed to do, then everything's going to be all right. Go to school, get good grades. And then you see what happened with Trayvon Martin, with Zimmerman, who's like a wannabe cop, you know, and then you go from there, you see what happened with Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Eric Gardner, Sandra Bland. In Ann Arbor, we had Ora Rosser. She was a lady that had mental health issues, and her boyfriend calls the police thinking that they're going to help. She pulls out a fish knife. They shot her in the head, killed her. Then they deemed it justifiable homicide. And, that's around that time is when I started doing my programs on what to do when stopped by the police. And we had our first one at New Hope Baptist Church in Ann Arbor. We brought in the police, the Ann Arbor police. We brought in the lawyers, judges. We brought in people from the community, and we talked about this issue. And after we had that meeting, they talked about having better training to deal with people with mental health issues after that. And so we were seeing some progress with that respect. So, with the program, I've gone into classrooms, churches, been all over the state, talking to people about what to do when stopped by the police. I brought in community partners to talk about these issues. I know the Black Panthers back in the day, they used to do programs, they call it How to Survive the Stop. And just because this issue, it's been a lingering issue. Dr. King talks about it in his I Have a Dream speech. He talks about the police brutality and how it needs to stop. I look at it as, I see, when I see stuff, I feel it, that's just how I operate. And so when I'm seeing on TV, people, Black men, women, and children being brutalized by the police, I'm like, we've got to do something. And I was like, what am I to do? And what I said to myself, I thought about is I'm a criminal defense attorney. I usually see people after they have committed the crime, given away all their rights. So let me start partnering with other folks and talking to people before they get in trouble with the police. Talk to the kids. We talked to some of the kids at Martin Luther King High School. And then the next day, the vice principal told me, he said that some kids got into an interaction with the police, but because of the tips that we provided, they were able to diffuse the situation and come home and live to tell their tale. So, we're seeing instant results, which is a very good thing. So I just think that, demonstrations and direct access, direct action, just like Dr. King said, they're needed for success to be achieved. So he, in his letter, Dr. King speaks to the underlying causes for the demonstrations in Birmingham. He notes that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no alternative. He discusses the 4 steps of a nonviolent campaign. Collection of the facts to determine whether justice exists, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. He basically says, we've gone through all of these steps in Birmingham. There can be no gainsaying the fact that racial injustice engulfs this community. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its record of brutality is wide known. Negroes have experienced grossly unjust treatment in the courts. I have a side note, it's when we were in Montgomery, Alabama, it's not Birmingham, but they still, to this day, they still have Confederate soldiers at the state capitol. So it's like, it's surreal, that you have these things, you hear about the past and the ills of the past, but there's still remnants of racism and oppression to this day. So he was talking about the brutality that is known for African Americans, that they've experienced grossly unjust treatment in the courts. I don't know if any of you have done any kind of implicit bias training. Harvard has the brain scan imaging where they talk about how we're all affected by it, how there are judges that will sentence a person who has a darker complexion, they'll give a heavier sentence, or even a white person who has if you have ethnic features, if you have darker complexion, you're more likely to get a harsher sentence. And so that's happening today, and that needs to stop. We need to make sure that everybody has implicit bias training to root that out. He talks in the letter about that there have been unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham more than in any other city in the nation. He said that the Negro leaders sought to negotiate with city fathers, but the latter constantly refused to engage in good faith negotiations. So they had made promises that they would stop, they would take down the whites only signs and things like that. they did it for a minute, and then they stopped, and then they had to come back, and the promises were broken. And so the decision came for direct action. So it says, we had no alternative but to prepare for direct action, whereby we present our bodies as means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and national community. I've been to St. Augustine in Florida, where they actually have there. I didn't know till I got there. They had Dr. King had been there, and they have the a replica, like one of the diners where they were going, and they were sitting there, and I don't know if some of you have seen some of the videos where they're training people on how to deal with somebody spitting in your face or pushing you, and it's this nonviolent construct. It's like this concept of not fighting back, and so it says here, mindful of the difficulties involved, we decided to undertake a process of self-purification. We began a series of workshops on nonviolence. We repeatedly asked ourselves, are you able to accept blows without retaliating? That's a question I have for a lot of y'all. How do y'all feel about that? Because I mean, who's gonna just let somebody, but they were driven, and then, they're passionate about the cause. Are you able to endure the ordeal of jail? We decided to schedule our direct action program for the Easter season, realizing that except for Christmas, this is the main shopping period of the year. Knowing that a strong economic withdrawal program would be the byproduct of direct action, we felt that this would be the best time to bring pressure to bear on the merchants for the needed change. So as I read this passage, again, we're hearing from Dr. King, who is the master teacher. I think to myself, today, there's still more rallies, protests, and boycotts that need to happen before we can see effective change in our nation. There needs to be, a lot of people I've heard this before, that there needs to be a racial reckoning. There needs to be truth and reconciliation. When I was in South Africa, there was actually some of the truth and reconciliation hearings were going on while I was there. And it was very powerful. There needs to be discussion about reparations. I know that there are some discussions about reparations in some states, but across the board, one of the things I teach in my class, we talk about HR 40, and I was telling my mom about it. My mom is like mature, and my mom was like, because HR 40 calls for the study of reparations, and my mom's like, a study? She's like, there need to be reparations. She's like, what is this, a study? And then there's this thing about there's no money, but we can send billions overseas to help other folks. So, which I have no problem with doing that, because there's tyranny is everywhere. But there's also still the remnants of oppression that are here in America. There's also there needs to be a war on poverty. Misogyny, the hatred of women, needs to be addressed. We've seen women in Iran protesting the murder of Mahsa Amini and laws forcing women to wear hijabs. 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, she was arrested in Tehran for improperly wearing a hijab. She was placed in detention and then beaten into a coma and died 3 days later on September 16th, 2022. Since then, there's been an uprising of protests that have taken place in solidarity with Mahsa Amini. And as we stand in solidarity with the women of Iran, we here in America, I mean, there's still work to do here. I did go to some of the rallies that they had in Ann Arbor dealing with the pro-choice issue. But we here in America must still combat forces that seek to restrict the bodily autonomy of women in a population that, if you go to Worldometer, they just updated it, the United Nations, they said we have a population of 8 billion people. And we're in America, which is, we always claim to be one of the most progressive countries in the world. We haven't even had a woman president. And there's a fight. There's a movie that talks about this. I'm trying to think of the name of the movie. Where it just talks about the women before Roe versus Wade passed, how they had an interchain of women that were working to help women to get safe abortions. And so that's what comes to mind when I think about this issue. But we need to make sure that women have and girls have rights to their bodily autonomy. So Dr. King further states in the letter that violent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that the community, which has constantly refused to negotiate, is forced to confront the issue. Constructive, non-violent tension is necessary for growth. And just as Socrates felt that it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that the individuals could rise from the bondage of myths and half-truths to the unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal, so must we see that the need for nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. The purpose of direct action program is to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. So we saw it back then. We've seen it recently, you know, with the George Floyd protests, with the, it's, you know, when there's an incident of police brutality, some people might say, why do you need to do that? Because I think, you know, if people don't protest, if they don't rise up, if they don't speak up about these issues and bring attention to it, then there are situations where the police will just get away with it. I've often had clients over the years that have told me about how they were mistreated by the police. And then it was an issue of, did they have like some kind of pictures, physical evidence? Did they have witnesses? Because a lot of times it would be their word against the police. And the jurors, because the police are in uniform, they tended to side with the police. They tended to just believe whatever they said. I mean, now I would hope that that's not always the case, but you know, it's still an issue. And so you see, there has to be, in certain situations, nonviolent direct action. I mean, as I said, it could be protests, marches, sit-ins, boycotting. We've seen on social media, people will identify companies that are connected to oppressive means, and they boycott the company, and then that there's effective change that's made. Dr. King goes on to say that we know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I've yet to engage in direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years, I've heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. So as I hear this expression, justice too long delayed is justice denied, I think to myself, what would have happened if we didn't have the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation, the passage of the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment? What would happen if we didn't have Dr. King, Rosa Parks, the other leaders of the civil rights movement doing the boycotts and sit-ins? Where would we be today? Contemporarily, where would we be? You know, we have the Innocent Project. We have the Innocent Projects in this state and across the nation, which gives a glimmer of hope to some of the people that are innocent that are caught up in the prison industrial complex. Where would we be? With the clean slate legislation, there are people that, you know, they committed a crime, they made a mistake. Sometimes they're young and dumb, or they were influenced by people, and they've corrected their mistake, and they deserve a second chance. So it's, you know, and I think it's incumbent that we as lawyers, law students, people in the legal community at large, try to do what we can to make change. I think that if we had more folks that are involved with the criminal law process, whether it be a prosecutor, defense attorney, or judge, then maybe we can help in the prison industrial complex. There's also been in the news, there's been, I'm mindful of the time, in the news, there's been issues with immigration, and that they're calling the immigration crisis and everything. And so if we had more people getting into the field of immigration, I think we can turn what is a so-called crisis into an equitable solution for everyone. Jackie, how am I on time?
We could probably close in a couple, maybe 2 minutes, and then we can open it up to question and answer.
Okay, all right, just want to check. Okay, so I think about what Black women have done for the nation. We have been there from, well, prior to the nation and during its creation. We have been holding down the fort. we have been supporting ourselves and the community. Without the Black woman's vote, I don't think President Biden would have made it, you know, and as the, you know, I don't think he would have been elected. As president of Black Women Lawyers in Michigan, we've been committed to increasing diversity on the bench. Been writing letters to help support African-American women, men get on the bench. We saw a disparity in the family court in Wayne County. There were no African-American judges, and we brought that to the attention of the court. We had a meeting, sent some emails, and now I'm proud to say that we have 3 African-American women that are either on the family court or on track to go to the family court. We supported our membership as they were running for office. We helped some of them to become judges. With Justice Kyra Bolden, we were there with her as members through the campaign, and then we wrote a letter of support to the governor and campaigned because our membership was like, we got to do something because we haven't had a Black woman on the Michigan Supreme Court. And then I don't know if you were aware, but recently when I don't know what was going on there with Justice Bernstein, when he publicly spoke about Justice Bolden's hiring practice, we called him out on that. And her, you know, she had her former law clerk, Peter Martell, somebody who had done his time, went to college, went to law school, is a PhD candidate. I mean, what else could he do? And then, so we spoke out about that. We issued a press release, and we talked to other groups about taking action. We're still contemplating what needs to be done as far as diversity, equity, inclusion, and implicit bias training, things of that nature. So, you know, we definitely want to just make sure that we do all that we can. Dr. King's vision, he helped to change the laws, you know, had the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act in 1965, which we have Shelby v. Holder, which, you know, it declared some parts of it unconstitutional. That's why we have the John Lewis Voting Rights Act of 2021, which needs to be passed to make sure that, you know, that the people's voting rights are protected. Dr. King goes on to talk about, you know, some of the various topics. He talks about just why that they're expressing why there's a need for movement, and he talks about his concern about the white moderate, how he feels that like there are some people that are like more overtly racist it's better to have somebody that's more overtly talking about how they feel than somebody that says to you they want change, but they're trying to hinder you from having direct positive action. So he talks about that. He talks about the importance of, you know, kind of analogizing racism is like a disease that needs to be brought to fruition. It needs to be brought to light to be healed. And I think of it as like, there's been cycles in our country where it has been brought to light, you know, during the Civil War, things like that. And then there's Reconstruction, Black codes, Jim Crow. It came to light again, or, you know, we started to work on healing it. Then it went back into remission. Now it's rearing its ugly head again, and we've got to do something about it. He talks about how the oppressed cannot remain oppressed forever. So I think that as we hear these words, that it's important that you find a way to he talks about channeling that African Americans at the time were very angry, and that if they didn't have this way of protesting and rallies, that there might be another more violent response. And he talks about challenging their energy into a positive, direct action. And I think that we can take this today and learn, like when we see something that's wrong, that's an injustice, it's important that we speak up about it. We speak out about it, that we connect with like-minded people. You know, we've got the affirmative action issue coming up. It's before the Supreme Court. We're waiting for their decision. I don't know, some of us don't think it's going to be good, but I mean, there can be protests, rallies, reaching out to your local elected officials about this issue. So in closing, I think that what we can all do to advance the cause of social justice and carry on Dr. King's legacy is to speak truth to power. If you're upset about something, speak up. For me, what I usually do is I journal about an issue. It helps me to process it, then come up with a plan of action. Try to connect with like-minded people and then brainstorm about a solution. I was listening to one of the ministers today who was talking about turning your pain into power. So I want to thank you all for this opportunity to speak, and peace and blessings.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Robyn. At this point, I would like to open it up to any questions from our audience members. I think what we can do is maybe unmute, or you can also feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat.
Oh, and somebody just put in the chat, Call Jane. That's the movie, because I couldn't think about it. I went to see it, but it's Call Jane is the movie I was talking about.
Okay, so we have our first question, Professor Mabel Martin Scott. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Ms. McCoy, I would like to thank you very much for your service. I appreciate everything that you're doing. I wanted to comment and ask you a question and just kind of thank you. I have two daughters who went to the University of Michigan, and I had one daughter, who was in her third year, and she was heading to a presentation at Ross Business School. And she was stopped by the Ann Arbor police, and she was in a car with another young African-American woman and a young Black man, and they were going to one of their major presentations, and they were stopped. And she said the police asked her, what were they doing there? Because of course they were not students on campus, that all three were African-American students, and they asked them to get out the car. They sat on the sidewalk. Long and short of it, they were sat on the sidewalk for about 45 minutes, and she missed her presentation. They didn't get to do that. And she told me about it 2 years later, because I think she knows her parents. And it was devastating to me. She had graduated from the school, and she said she made this intentional decision not to tell myself and her father, who graduated from the University of Michigan, because she did not want us to respond. But she wanted to thank us for telling her and doing, and I thank you for what you do when you say, what do you do when you're stopped by the police? And you're creating this group that does that. Some people look at that and say, that's ridiculous. Well, it isn't. It's something that we have to deal with all the time. It's not that it's going to happen, but the really big thing is, what do you do? And every parent, unfortunately, has to have that conversation, African-American, with their children. And it's really, really important, because the way you respond can have devastating effect. And so the fact that you decided to do this, I'm very, very grateful for your having decided to go out and do that kind of thing, because there are people who have done it, and I've heard of you doing it in the Lansing community, and it is unbelievably necessary. So I want to thank you, and I want to ask you, you talked about the death of the young woman in terms of the mental health issues, but what was the response? My question is, what was the response in the Ann Arbor and I guess the state response to your going out and taking on this initiative?
We did, well, I would say the police, what they did is they came to our meeting, and they did institute practices to deal with people that have mental health challenges. They have a commission that deals with these issues in Washtenaw County. I know at the state level, there has been, I've talked to some of the state senators and state reps. There has been a movement underway to deal with these issues, pass legislation dealing with qualified immunity. I mean, it hasn't passed, but there's a movement underway. There's a movement to make sure that the police have body cameras, also that the body cameras are turned on, because they can be turned off, and if they're not turned on, that there's penalties. But I thank you for your comment. And as for your daughter, if she's still, I mean, I know it may have been a couple years ago, she still can reach out to internal affairs at the Ann Arbor Police and make a complaint about what happened. She can reach out to there's the ACLU and let them know about what happened, because it's unfortunate. I have one of my mentors was stopped by the police, and he was an official at U of M, and we dealt with that. We had to deal with that. I'm not gonna get into all the details because we recorded, but we had to deal with that because, like I said, sometimes we openly do stuff and sometimes we do stuff behind the scenes, but we handled it because it was an interaction with the police that shouldn't have happened, and we resolved it. So thank you.
No, and thank you again for your service. And we have taken care of that. I appreciate it. Thank you very, very much.
Okay.
Kelly shared a comment in the chat, and she talked about that happened to her son when they first moved into the neighborhood. A new car, albeit an average vehicle, and they asked him whose car it was, and actually saying you fit a profile. Kelly, not to put you on the spot, did you want to elaborate on that or ask a question?
Actually, I just wanted to share what happened to him. It was the same exact thing. Very similar. And I have seen this "you fit a profile" kind of thing before. And also, my ex-husband and I, we were stopped. This was when we were first married, and we had a new child in our car. And he worked for the city of Lansing at that time. He had a bandana on his head. Not any kind of, just a weird bandana, just a fun bandana. And we were on our way to pick up his check, and they stopped him. They frisked him. They put him hands up on the back of the car, asked him what he was doing with me. And we had a small child in the back seat of the car. And then after about a half hour, they let us go. So I did file a complaint. I got no response for my complaint, of course, but it did happen.
Okay,
And,
yeah, that's
yes.
unfortunate. I know one of the first times I got stopped, I was visiting family, and I was in Benton Harbor, Michigan, and at the time there had been reports about the police there, and I got stopped twice. It was my boyfriend at the time, and they were like, "What you doing out here?" And they asked for his license and my license, and I actually went and challenged that ticket. And the judge, I still got a ticket from that. But the judge was just like, because I was like, this is, I've been reading Kenneth Meek's book, Driving While Black, and he was talking about how 93% of people commit traffic violations, but that African Americans are disproportionately stopped, or, African Americans, if you're a white person in a car with some black people, if you dress a certain way, you're more likely to get stopped. And so,
well, and I'm going to give you some context to that, Robyn. My ex-husband is Hispanic, but he appears, facially appearing white. So we were, like I said, we were stopped, and he was frisked, and he was really patted down, and really, he felt threatened, really threatened. So yeah, you're right. A lot of it has to do with either you're with someone who's African American, or you are the African American in the car driving. So I agree with you, Robyn, on that.
Right. That's unfortunate. I mean, that's why I do this programming and the What to Do and Stop by the Police, because I will talk with the police too. I mean, that's what we need to have more conversations with the police about. I mean, we know they have a job to do, they have a duty to protect and serve, but can they do it in a more compassionate way? I mean, I know one of my partners that I've worked with in the past, Detective Brian Fountain with the Detroit Police, what he says is, when you deal with the police, comply now, complain later. And then, I've said that to the kids, and the kids are very forthright. Kids, they will tell, they're like, "Okay, Mr. McCoy, we're glad you're talking to us, but are you talking to the police?" So I made that a part of my mission to have more dialogue. I think we all need to have more, as parents, I'm an auntie, as community members, we need to have more conversations with the police. We, obviously we want to make sure that they do their job, that they get home safely too, but we want our family members and loved ones to get home and be safe about it.
Okay, we have let's see, it looks like Director Petty has her hand raised. You have the floor.
Thank you. Hi, Robyn. My question is, how do we disrupt the pipeline to prison from the context of education. And just to elaborate a little bit, I used to work as a K through 12 educator. I was very disheartened by some of the things that I observed with how men of color, young men of color are treated within K-12 education. For example, at particular school that I taught at, they were not encouraged to take AP accelerated classes at all. Like the classes were extremely segregated. So I'm just wondering, and I know it's not an easy answer, but what are some ways that we can disrupt that pipeline to prison for young men of color?
Yeah, I think so. I came across this issue because I was working with the Michigan Children's Law Center, and they had created an educational advocacy unit. And what we were doing is we were representing our kids on the neglect and abuse cases and delinquency cases, and a majority of them were African American, and because we were seeing disparity in treatment. And so I think it's incumbent that I think first the parents need to be educated more about their rights. There is the Council for Parents Advocates and attorneys. It's called COPA, and I've been to their conference. You can get, if you can't go to the conference, you can get their tapes, but I think we need more members of the public to become educational advocates. You don't have to be a lawyer to be an educational advocate. I think we need more law students, lawyers to become educational advocates, and there needs to be more funding put into place. Because what we were doing is we were looking at some of the kids, and you have some kids that have special ed issues and they need to get the proper testing to make sure that they're going to be successful in school. You have some kids that are considered what's called twice exceptional that need to get their supports that way. You also have general ed kids, and there are certain perceptions, stereotypes that are placed on certain children, Black children, children of color. And for me, that's one of the things I noticed, as I said, when I was working in Detroit in the schools, it made me want to go back and kiss my parents. And just because, when I was in school, I'm in a predominantly white school, and I'm like, oh my gosh, whatever, I'm missing out. There are no Black people, I'm missing out. And then I go into the schools, some of the schools and it's not just Detroit, there are other schools, but I can that's mainly because that's where our nonprofit is based. The kids are dealing with all kinds of issues, like dealing with bullying on social media. I didn't have to deal with the bullying. I mean, I had to deal with bullying maybe in person, but on social media, dealing with bullying. And then the teacher's supposed to keep up with the bullying on social media. Kids having kids not having enough food or clothing or shelter. So I think a way to deal with that is, I think we can all try to do, like I go, like this fall, I went in and I did some programming with the Ypsi Public Schools. I'm planning to do some more programming with the Detroit Public Schools. If as a community person, as a law student, as an advocate, I think you can go into the schools and talk to do some know your rights programming. Like one thing I see is there's a code of conduct that the schools have, and they give it to the parents. But I think what would be helpful is every, like maybe August, to have some kind of trainings, like where you review the code of conduct and you talk to the parents about what the rules are. And and the thing is, you're seeing what I've seen as I've done the delinquency work is children being criminalized for adult behavior, and that's unacceptable. I mean, my professor, I had Professor Yale Kamazar when I was at U of M Law School. He was white, and he was talking about how disproportionately Black males were being profiled by the police when he was younger. He said, for me, I did stuff and the police warned me, but he said, I don't see that happening for my Black counterparts. And so I think it's incumbent, we need to do more programming with the schools. There needs to be more mentors, more male mentors. What I saw in the course is we had jurists, a referee and a judge, both male. We had women as well. But the students, we had some special programming that we did where the kids participated in the programming, and as long as they went to school, got good grades, if they needed to take medicine, took medicine, did counseling, they wouldn't have a record. And the kids, we were coming to court more often, like maybe once a month. The kids actually thrived, and we had a special program. They graduated from the program, and Deb Nelson that was a part of that put that program together with one of our judges, Judge Joseph. But it's, you know, I think it's just a matter, I think, of being more proactive. And then also there needs to be more legislation in place to protect the rights of the children.
Thank you. Those are great suggestions. I appreciate that.
I want to be mindful of time. I would like to thank our guest, Robyn McCoy, for spending time with us and drawing attention to these issues and serving as an example of how to be social justice minded, and for drawing attention to the numerous issues, not only in the criminal context, but the mental health and substance abuse issues. Lastly, I would like to turn it over to President and Dean McGrath for any parting comments.
I just wanted to thank Robyn McCoy for her wonderful handling of this very difficult subject. And thank you all for coming and sharing, and especially in the conversation at the end. Thank you, everybody. And thanks again for coming. Appreciate it.